On May 24th in 2020, two brothers broke into the abandoned Belvoir Park Hospital in Belfast during lockdown, a place where the mentally ill once died alone and forgotten. Rory and Connor Byrne thought that they were just exploring ruins. They had no idea that they were walking into a trap that had been waiting over a century to spring, and that neither of them would ever speak again. In its later life, up until 2006, this stately home operated as Northern Ireland's only radiotherapy unit, but in 1906, it was known as the Purtisburn Fever Hospital, an institute for the mentally unwell, where death and disease coexisted. Beneath the allure of the grand sashed windows and the elaborate paintings was a place of death, and as such, there is a darkness to this place. A darkness that Rory and Connor discovered for themselves when they stepped into its abandoned remains. Two brothers entered that building that day unaware that only one of them would escape, and to this day, Connor is still reported as missing. This is Rory Byrne's written account, as shown to Officer Carroll in the aftermath of the horrors. On May 24th, 2020, two brothers broke into the abandoned Belvoir Park Hospital in Belfast during lockdown, a place where the mentally ill once died alone and forgotten. Rory and Connor Byrne thought that they were just exploring ruins. They had no idea that they were walking into a trap that had been waiting over a century to spring, and that neither of them would ever speak again. In its later life, up until 2006, this stately home operated as Northern Ireland's only radiotherapy unit, but in 1906, it was known as the Purtisburn Fever Hospital, an institute for the mentally unwell where death and disease coexisted. Beneath the allure of the grand sashed windows and elaborate paintings was a place of death, and as such, there is a darkness to this place. A darkness that Rory and Connor discovered for themselves when they stepped into its abandoned remains. Two brothers entered that building that day unaware that only one of them would escape, and to this day, Connor is still reported as missing. This is Rory Byrne's written account, as shown to Officer Carroll in the aftermath of the horrors. My great-grandmother was sent to Purtisburn Fever Hospital when she was 27 years old. I don't know exactly what happened to her, but I know that she died in that place all alone, and ever since, it left a dark smudge on our family. My mom didn't like to talk about it. If it was ever mentioned, her eyes would cloud over and she would go off and distract herself with chores. The only time she ever spoke to me about it was to tell me that my great-grandmother had felt alone, always alone. My mom never mentioned it again before she went to her grave. The only family I had left was my brother, Connor. He was a misfit, but at least he was blood, and I loved him regardless of his flaws. Connor was at an in-between phase in his life and was sleeping on my sofa at the time. And due to lockdown, he was unable to move out and make something of his life. He was restless, a restlessness that felt contagious. During COVID, when rules were as rife as the virus, I read a lot of articles to try and curb my boredom. I came across one on Belvoir Park Hospital and how a guard had to quit due to experiencing strange occurrences there. I only skimmed the article, but it planted a seed in my head. Being cooped up in that tiny apartment was difficult, but there was barely enough room in it for one, let alone us both. It started to feel suffocating. We needed to get out and do something before the walls seemed to crush in on us, and the government announced that it was now okay to meet outside in groups of 6, but Connor and I were alone. We had no one else to meet, and as we saw it, we had to make our own plans to stay sane. I suggested visiting the old hospital, as I guess I thought it might perk his interest. I knew the pandemic wouldn't last forever, but I was worried that the rut he was in would, and I desperately wanted to help shake him out of it. He seemed to like this idea, so late one afternoon I drove us out there, and we parked out of eye line from the hospital itself, and we walked through the trees to get to it. The estate was surrounded by acres of forestry and unkept gardens, and there was a stream that snaked through it. The building itself, although run down, seemed to tower over us. It was a shadow of beauty that seemed to beckon us in. Due to the huge scale of the building, we weren't worried about the guards. We watched on from the tree line and waited about 10 minutes just to scope the surroundings out. And in that time, I saw a shadowy figure pass by the distance, dressed all in black. I presumed it was a guard, and so as soon as he was out of sight, I gave a thumbs up to Connor to say that the coast was clear, and he wrinkled his nose at me, a mannerism he had done since he was a child, a tell that he had mischief on his mind. We didn't need to exchange words. We both knew it was the right time to move, and that we were doing this. With the graying, birdless sky as our backdrop, we stepped out from the tree line and sneaked around the side of the building. Although at first glance, the windows and doors were boarded up, it turned out this was mostly just at the front of the building for show. Connor remarked how the guards needed an easy way to get in and out. He found a window around the back covered by a piece of plastic that flapped in the wind, and as he pulled it back, I remember staring at the window. It had no glass or window frame remaining. It felt like it was there on purpose, as if it was an entrance designed to tempt us in. This uncomfortable feeling seemed to twist in my gut, and I don't know, I can't explain it. I just had this strong feeling that I shouldn't go in there. Connor didn't share my feelings. He gripped what remained of the window frame and began climbing through it. I watched him step inside and then stare at me. "Hey Rory, are you coming or are you too chicken?" he jibed, flapping his folded arms in imitation. It had been my idea to come out here, so as I saw it, I couldn't back out now. I put my doubts aside and I climbed through the window and jumped onto the ground. Connor said something to me, muffled words I couldn't process. I was staring out of the window. I saw someone there, over by a crumbling wall close to one of the outer buildings. It was a shadowy figure, a man, I think, but it was hard to tell for sure. Whoever it was had their arms by their side. I didn't have to see their eyes clearly to feel that they were looking directly at me. I turned and I pulled on Connor's arm, and then I pointed over at the figure, but to my confusion, whoever it was had gone. Connor laughed at me, wrinkled his nose, and told me he would get back at me for trying to psych him out. I just laughed and I went along with it, even though I knew what I saw. As I stopped looking outside, I became aware of this place and the coldness that seemed to radiate from it. It wasn't derelict. They wanted to keep it in some kind of working order in case they ever needed to use it as an isolation center. But it felt somehow desolate and void of light. The walls and the floor were coated in dust and dirt, but the only piece of furniture in the room was a single dark green chair, tilted due to having one metal leg shorter than the others. I looked over at it, and I saw words written in smudged blue ink on the chair fabric. I had to squint to make them out. Always alone. Reading those words caused a chill to travel down my spine, but before I could linger on this thought, I heard Connor's footsteps echo across the hard floor, followed by a shout. "Hey Rory, you've got to come see this." I followed the sound of his voice into a nearby room and instantly coiled back. The windows were boarded up, causing a gloomy light from the open door to cast across the cracked plasterboard walls. Scratched into them were the words, "Alone, always." Connor made a joke of it and said that it was the ghost's room. He started making ghost noises and swooshing his arms around. I didn't see the funny side. I just felt the coldness. I just wanted to get out of that room and that place, but as I left it, the words, "always alone," still circled my head. Connor pushed ahead and I followed behind him, trailing in and out of the rooms. I felt jittery, and every little creak and sound made me flinch. I still felt like someone or something was watching me, and that feeling seemed to stick to my skin, and I couldn't shake it off. As I looked around the long, vast hallways, shadows seemed to lurk there in the corners and the cracks. We went into several more rooms, a staff break room with empty shelves and cupboard doors hanging on their hinges, old bedrooms, some with metal bed frames and others bare. All the while, I felt like I was being watched. I spotted the words in every room, and so did Connor. Always alone. I saw them carved under the metal bed, behind a peeling piece of wallpaper, scribbled into a rag of an old curtain, scraped into the door, and smudged in chalk on the floor. This didn't feel right, but Connor couldn't see how wrong it felt. It became a game to him, and a nightmare to me. He darted from one room to another, desperate to find the hidden message, as if it was some sort of twisted scavenger hunt. I pulled on his arm and I told him I wanted to leave, but he shrugged free of me and wrinkled his nose, and he said, "Why, it's just getting interesting." I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen in a while. They were alive with excitement. He snatched my phone out of my pocket and taunted it in front of me. I tried jumping to get it, but there was no reasoning with him when he got like this, when he viewed life as a game. I'd put up with this my entire life, and normally I got on with it. It was typical Connor, but not now. Not when I felt there was something wrong with this place. With the urgency clear in my voice, I muttered, "Connor, quit messing. This is serious. Give it back. We're leaving." He didn't listen. He never listened. He just smirked at me, wrinkled his nose, and then snorted, "You want it. Come and get it." He ran along the hallway, and I knew I couldn't catch up with him. He'd always been quicker than me. He stopped in the doorway of the furthest room along the hallway and leaned against it, and as he waved my phone at me, my heart pounded with the inkling that this place wasn't right, and I begged him, "Connor, please." And I watched him grin back at me, and with a full voice of resentment, he said, "Rory, it can't always be your way." He stepped into the room and out of sight. Anger swarmed through me, and I was about to follow him and demand he stop playing mind games. That's when I saw it. The shadow. It spread over the doorway, making itself look contorted and monstrous. I tried to convince myself it was just a guard, swore under my breath, and hurried into the room that I saw Connor go into, saying, "Connor, they're here. We need to go." Only Connor wasn't there. I thought I'd gone to the wrong room, but how could I have? It was the last room along. I know he went into this room. Brick walls surrounded me, and I felt something drip onto my cheek, and I looked up. What I saw there was horrific and made me gasp with pure fear. Headless rats were hanging from it, nailed in place by their tails. The blood was fresh and dripping down onto the floor. Something written across their matted dull fur, something crimson red. I heard a scream. Connor's scream. I heard the fear in it, the pain he felt. I knew this was beyond one of his jokes, that this was real. And through my fear I shouted, "Connor, where are you? Connor, I can't see you." I could hear his voice, as though it was echoing from the walls, but I couldn't see him. I scraped at the walls to try and find him, but plaster and rubble splintered around me. I knew I needed to look somewhere else, and so I moved toward the door. And that's when the shadowy figure appeared there, an untouchable vision to torment me. The door swung shut in front of me, and Connor's screams continued, trapped within the foundations of the walls. I wanted to free him, but I didn't know how to. I didn't know how to break him free, and I didn't know how to free myself. I ran over to the barred window. The room was completely bare, so there was nothing to use to try and pry them open. I shouted Connor's name until my voice croaked into nothingness. And then I sat there on the cold, blood-trickled ground and rocked myself back and forth as I stared up at the headless rats. I stared at them until the markings on them began to make sense. They were letters. 11 hanging, headless rats, each with a different letter on it. I didn't know then what the anagram was spelling out, but I know what it was now. There was only one thing it could be: always alone. The loneliness was more consuming than my fear. The thought of dying alone down there amongst the unknown shadows was petrifying. I pounded my fists against the door, trying to pry free the window's metal bars with my bare fingers. I stuck my fingers through the gaps in the bars and begged for someone to find me. But darkness now covered the ground, and I remained trapped inside the rat room, smelling only death and my own fear. I lay there all night thinking this was my end, and whoever had done that to the rats and locked me in here would be back for me. But then, as time ticked by, I had a more terrifying thought. What if they never came back and left me there? What if I died alone? My despair scratched away at me. I felt the shadow there, within the walls, but I couldn't see it anymore. I felt like a caged animal, one being watched for something else's amusement. I sat there, desperate for this to end, and I scratched at my flesh until it was red raw. I started talking to the headless rodents, begging them to set me free. I must have fallen asleep like that as I awoke, lying on my back, staring up at those things and tasting the specks of their rusty tasting blood on my lips. I rubbed it onto the back of my arm, and I saw what was scratched there on my swollen skin. A message I didn't realize I'd scratched there. The words, "Always alone." In that moment, I felt it, the shadow, and then I saw it flicker across the wall over to the door that now hung open. The shadow seemed to linger there, staring at me with an empty look, its long arms limp at its side. I stared at it in disbelief. I wanted to ask it where my brother was, but my voice was still lost to that place. It will always be lost to that place. I knocked on the wall one last time and waited for a scream. Only silence remained. He was gone. Lost. He was gone to the walls. I walked out of there and kept on walking. I remember trees of olive and fresh greens, and I remember the trickling of a stream. But I also remember the rats. Always 11 of them, always headless. They were hanging from the trees, lifeless by my feet, placed in a row by the stream. Always 11 headless rats, always 11 jumbled letters, but the words were always the same. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can see them. I see the words, and I know what they mean. Alone, always. Always alone. On the morning of May 25th, 2020, Rory Burns showed up at the local police station and handed them a note saying his brother, Connor Byrne, had vanished inside the old Belvoir Park Hospital and was now trapped within the walls. The police tried interviewing Rory, but he didn't utter a word. They got a doctor to examine him, who put his loss of speech down to severe trauma. The police searched the Belvoir Park Hospital and didn't find any traces of Connor. The security guard patrolling the ground the previous night claims that he didn't see any signs of intruders, but admitted that he had avoided certain rooms on his rounds due to sensing a dark presence there. 4 years on, Connor Byrne remains a missing person. Those who knew him say he was a troubled young man who simply chose to run away from his past. Rory remains adamant that his brother didn't run away. The presence that roams the hallways of the old Belvoir Park Hospital took him and trapped him within the foundations of the building. Rory Byrne hasn't spoken a single word since that fateful day when he decided to leave his apartment and explore a piece of the past. The feeling of being afraid is unnerving, but the fear of being alone, truly and completely alone, is an altogether more harrowing horror. What haunts us most isn't the darkness we can see, it's the loneliness that we carry within it. If this tale stirred something familiar in your memory, something you've always known but never wanted to name, you're not alone in that knowing. What do you think really happened to Connor? Was it the shadow that took him, or something else entirely? Share your thoughts by the fire below. There's more. The security guard never told anyone about those rooms that he avoided. But that's a story for another time. Subscribe to join our circle. There are more mysteries waiting in the shadows. Until we meet again, keep close to the light and to each other. For more scary horror stories, please share and subscribe. See you in the next video.